Hello everyone and Happy New Year! Today I decided to review Squid Game Season 2. I saw so many different opinions about the second iteration of the show, so I decided to throw my hat into the ring. Also, my Nosferatu review was really not that good, and I realized that I am, in fact, one of those lames that needs a script in order to say anything coherent and substantive. And I'm also going to note that I do know I talk very fast. I'm going to try to talk slow, but then it makes my videos so long that I'm like, who's going to watch this? Anyway, here goes. I'm just going to do what I do best, which is just talk about things, I guess. All right, so in order to understand my review of Squid Game Season 2, I think it's important to establish my thoughts on Season 1. I thought Squid Game, it is not plural, Squid Game, was a great show that made social commentary entertaining and not overly didactic. The strength of season 1 was the ensemble cast of characters in the game who had differing motives, which led to interesting plot and character development that made people heavily invested in the show's outcome. However, season 1 was a scathing critique of capitalism and the desperation it puts many people in. I think one of the most profound moments in season 1 is from episode 2, where we see the surviving players of Red Light, Green Light return to their homes after a vote and realize that their lives are not worth living unless they are able to win the money available through the games. Season 2's primary flaw is that the ensemble cast of characters is significantly weaker than Season 1's. Moreover, the weakness of the ensemble cast highlights overall plot weaknesses inherent to the show's construct. Despite my desire for a more fleshed out cast, I still was very engaged with Season 2, and I thought it attempted to add important antidotes to its original criticism of capitalism, which I will be reviewing today. I'm not going to go through the plot of season 2 beat by beat, but I will be referencing important plot points, hence spoiling the show if you have not watched it already. So, the motif of gambling addiction is present throughout the show. Gi-hun, the protagonist, is a former gambling addict who is underdeveloped in every other aspect of his life. So despite having the resources to rekindle a relationship with his estranged daughter, he decides to engage in a 2-year manhunt to find the recruiter and stop the games. Junho, the police officer who managed to sneak into the games in season 1, and the brother of the frontman In-ho, is also someone who's arguably addicted to the conventional definitions of justice. This is why he chooses to become a traffic officer as opposed to a detective who has to go to extensive lengths to find sufficient evidence to indict criminal activity. The first two episodes in season 2 are used to establish the new dynamics of the recurring characters. Gi-hun is a shut-in using the former gangster that harassed him about his debts to find the recruiter. We learn that the recruiter finds life futile and describes the players of the games as trash that the game efficiently takes out. This is profound because this is quite frankly how the world views most people. And what I mean by the world is I mean corporations and politicians. We are collateral to the ambitions and profit margins of giant corporations. This is why people feel cathartic justice over the death of a UHC CEO because he belongs to a class of people who are not supposed to be collateral. They're never supposed to be the trash that are taken out like they are taken out in the Squid Games. The way the recruiter acts reminds me a lot of the basement husband character in Parasite. The husband has amassed a lot of debt and lives in the basement of the house where his wife works as a servant in Parasite. He has this illogical and near religious devotion to the wealthy man who lives above him. Similarly, the recruiter has a devotion to the philosophy of the games and seems to truly believe in the tenets of that philosophy. Here in America, a lot of people have affection for the upper classes, but that comes from this false dream, or one might call the American dream, that we are all just one great opportunity away from the billionaire class. But I would argue that the devotion depicted by the recruiter is closer to religious fervor, which is why he finally shows that fear when he puts the gun into his head and shoots himself, knowing that the bullet is going to be released, because it's sort of like his God or his philosophy has failed him in that moment. And I think it's interesting as well because I think that the recruiter represents this concept of not just a recruiter, but, sort of those people who try to convert people all the time. This idea that we have to do our best to ensure God will is rendered on earth. So instead of just quote unquote allowing things to happen naturally, you could see the games as this accelerated process of what happens to people in the long run. I'll also note in the first episode, we meet Woo-suk, who is the gangster's boss underling who witnesses the boss's murder by the recruiter and decides to join Gi-hun in his quest to identify the island where the games occurs. He is the first weak character that I really had issues with. His motivation to join the hunt for the island is kind of weak in my opinion. I understand that he had a very close connection to this boss who apparently was, officiated his wedding and what have you, but still, you know that there's a lot of death involved in this. I don't think that it was worth all that. He had an opportunity to leave, and instead, for plot purposes, he's made a core character of the cast. But to be honest, I think Gi-hun's motivations are weak as well. But again, putting into context this idea that maybe he's replacing his gambling addiction with this addiction toward finding the manhunt, it makes a little bit more sense. He's really using the chase for the game and its operators as a shield against all the other things that he could be developing in his personal life that he has no issues with. I do like how Junho, the police officer, and Gi-hun link up, but I wish we just saw more of just them two. And this is why I kind of am frustrated by Woo-suk, because I feel like he becomes an interloper between them when I feel like he interrupts the flow of conversation. And again, maybe arguably the plot point is to say, hey, we can't have Gi-hun and Junho sort of recognize that Junho knows who the front man is and all of that, and we can't have that happen too early within the line of the plot. But I just found Woo-suk to be an insufficient interloper between them. I did find that the boat captain was suspicious from the jump, but I found him interesting. But I found him suspicious because in order to find Junho and save his life, he would have had to been close to the island where the accident occurred, and in a short period of time, because a man who got shot can't really survive in ocean for 10 minutes. And also, it's kind of clear that where he was shot, even though I'm sure we're not supposed to think this deeply about it, where he was shot over rougher waters. So I suspect that man was just always there. He's a part of the operations in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how they develop this character further and how he kind of comes into direct contact and direct conflict with Junho once Junho figures it all out. I also like Nuyol. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Please, apologies for my Korean pronunciation, but she's a North Korean defector who we learn is one of the mass shooters in the game. It makes sense that the shooters have lives outside of the game because they only last a week, and so they probably don't want to pay these people because even though they're these rich men who can afford to have all these people killed in these elaborate games, they're not going to pay for people to do work that's not necessary outside of that week of execution that they need. So, but I just found that it was really risky, I thought, of having all these people who know that they've killed people out there. And this is especially because we know that they unmask in front of each other regularly. So, there could be certain things that they do in order to protect themselves in the outside world should things ever blow up inside of this game. But I understand how, because they're assassinating people in these games, they also have very little motivation to out themselves and the games themselves. All right. Gambling addiction also comes up with the players and why they insist that we simply need to do one more game before they decide to leave. So this is something I haven't seen people talk about. One reason why the vibes in season 2 are so different is because of how that first game, red light, green light, goes. In the first, this is the first time we have a previous player, a winner at that, who is among the current players. And Gi-hun is also willing to help people avoid death. We saw in season 1 that over half of the participants in red light, green light die because they're unaware of the stakes. And then when they figure out that death is actually involved, their key instinct is to escape and try to get help or just escape the situation, which just leads to more of them killed. So in the first season, I think a lot of people forgot this, red light, green light eliminated over half of the players, which is why they voted, even though it was also by a small margin, but they still voted to go back home because they just saw a huge massacre. And while of course they also saw a huge massacre in game 1, they recognized that Gi-hun actually knows what's going on because he predicted what was going to happen. And so I think that just like gambling, people are more likely to continue to gamble if they win big early on. So you see more people win big in that first game, and also know that they have this, talisman, this luck talisman in Gihan to potentially also fare better in future games. So yeah, I think that all plays a role in why the vibes in season 2 are different. I wish more people talked about it, right? Like, that's what gambling does and why gambling addiction can be so hard to get out of. Because if you ever experience a gambling high, i.e. win, especially early on while you're trying to gamble, even if it's just for fun and with friends, or just like, I know for sure, like, this team that is an underdog is going to win, and then you actually win that, it becomes addictive to try to get that win again. And then you have the false sense of confidence, which I think most of the players did. All right. So in terms of the characters in the game, they are significantly weaker than the ensemble cast from season 1. I mentioned this already, but let's get into details. So I'm a huge Big Bang fan. I really love second generation K-pop. So I had a lot of hope for T.O.P's portrayal of Thanos, but I found Thanos simply unbearable. I think a character being annoying and hating can be an intent of the script and can work really well. But I just felt like Thanos was unrealistic, and that's what really took me out of it. It wasn't that he was annoying or I hated him on screen. I've loved a lot of characters, or I've enjoyed a lot of characters on screen who I've hated, who I found annoying. I just found him so unrealistic. I understand the stereotype that is trying to be created here, but it still just felt like Thanos was a caricature in a show that's trying to criticize the reality of capitalism. So while everybody else to some extent felt grounded, Thanos didn't. Even the gangster from season 1 was more engaging because his evilness and annoyingness felt grounded and not ephemeral. So yeah, unfortunately, I will say I just didn't feel like Thanos was real. I feel like he was a little bit too flamboyant, and I understand that he's supposed to represent somebody who's also using drugs consistently, but still, that still didn't feel accurate to what drug use looks like. I don't know. I had a lot of questions. I felt like they could have subdued this character just a little bit more, made his quirkiness more rare so it'd be more fun to see it, as opposed to it feeling like it sometimes felt, and I know this sounds so bad, it sometimes felt like Thanos, which I think again is the point, is trying to steal the spotlight. But there was just some moments where I just was like, I don't know why he's doing this, and I don't feel like this is real. Okay, so I'm probably one of the few people that actually thinks the shaman woman is extremely compelling, and I want to see more of her, and I think that she's really important in the criticism of South Korean society specifically. So for context, the prior Korean president, Park Geun-hye, was embroiled in a scandal that found her impeached and even imprisoned for activities including inappropriate counseling with a Rasputin-like woman named Choi Soon-sil, who you'll see characterized in being taken away into custody by the Korean police there on the right-hand side, who is presumed as well to have undue influence over Korean politics writ large. Korea does seem, in general, to have a pretty significant cult problem, and it would be really cool to further explore the impact of like a cult-like figure and their influence over others. I think the issue is that arguably Gi-hun is also a cult-like figure. So I feel like maybe that would also be an issue, but I think that probably Koreans in general have had a lot of issue, taking religious fervor and trying to kind of combat that with the truth and also logics and facts. So that would be something I like to see explore more. In terms of the trans woman Hyunju, she's also a fascinating character. It's important to note that her reference for working for the military is extremely significant, and I think it's a dog whistle that definitely probably the average Korean is familiar with, but as Americans maybe are less familiar with it. I was just reading the headlines one day and I remember this story. So the South Korean army prohibits transgender people from joining the army. I'm not actually sure what America's stance on that. I don't know, whatever. A significant case in 2021 involved a transgender woman who was discharged from military service despite getting reassignment surgery Thailand before her military enlistment. So after her discharge, the woman died by suicide. She killed herself, but was vindicated posthumously after a South Korean court ruled that the military discharge was unlawful. So kind of like a very small inch towards, this idea of non-discrimination against members of the LGBTQ community. I find it brave that the Squid Game writer, I know his name, I reference it later, Hwang Dong-hyuk, did reference a transgender woman, because that's pretty brave, especially for South Korea, which does not have legalized gay marriage. But here, even in America, the anti-trans fervor is really big. I think the anti-trans fervor is big basically internationally. So to still decide to keep this in the story, I think it was extremely brave, and I know a lot of people have criticisms about this character being played by cis man, but and again, I'm a huge ally. I can't explain that enough, but I still think that it's pretty progressive, in my opinion, to still include the story when, again, there's other stories that they could have put in here and expanded upon more. I do think it's funny that we see another one of Gi-hun's friends in Jung-bae here pictured, because it's sort of like his town specifically, since this is now the second friend that he finds in the games with him. It's just full of risk-seeking degenerates. It's like, is risk-seeking behavior genetic? Although I have read some reports that men in general are far more risk-seeking than women, so gambling often is a bigger issue. So it makes sense that both of these men are risk seekers. I also want to note how Sang-woo from season 1, he's also a gambler, right? But he gambles with what I call like gambling with your finger up, which is the stock market. So because he deals with equities, his gambling wasn't necessarily as, low down, but I like this idea that they're kind of parallel characters with different types of vices. And one went to a prestigious school in Korea, and the other seems to have a factory working class job, and yet they still end up in the same situation. This idea that this system that is created and told that this meritocratic means of going the right way still doesn't work, regardless if you go to the right school or what have you. So anyway, I thought Jung-bae, though, in season 2, not that strong of a character. I found him interesting. I was extremely frustrated that he didn't reveal, and it was just like, just let him know that he didn't reveal to Gi-hun that Inho, or the frontman, or 001 or player 1 actually killed somebody in front of him. That would have helped a lot. And it was just like, what is he protecting? What is he trying to do? Because isn't his loyalty primarily to Gi-hun as opposed to Inho? I just was a little confused by that. I also do want to quickly insert here that I actually do believe in Gi-hun not recognizing that player 001 might be the same thing. Although one thing that I was like frustrated by is that they use the il, which means one in Korean. So I think they do the same thing with the founder from season 1. That should have been the hint. This idea like, why is il in the name? Why is the 1 number in the name? And I do recognize that there was a joke that Inho made where he's like, Seung, that means last name. That literally means last name in Korean. So I feel like he was teasing Gi-hun, and he was teasing him for not recognizing all the hints that he was throwing out. Anyway, that was a huge tangent that was not scripted, but still slightly important. In general, I found Jung-bae not as compelling as a character as Sang-woo, nowhere near. And even though I was sad when he died, there was no emotion because I didn't feel too much character develop from him. So one character I did wish that we explore more, and we probably will be able to explore more in season 3, is Min-soo. All right. Min-soo is a fascinating archetype of a character. And I saw right before I made this video, some YouTube short of people saying like, we all hate Min-soo. No, I think that the average person is actually Min-soo. Who is Min-soo, right? Min-soo is a person who's not that self-aware and doesn't realize how much of a lackey he is. I found that I really love this moment where he's confused when I believe Sima, I tried to look up her name, but I couldn't find it, but the girl that he hangs out with identifies him as a woman that wouldn't deceive her. And he was literally confused. He didn't have that self-awareness. And that's because most of us are taught to follow the rules and do things as we're told. And we rarely are truly in opportunities to fight back. And I actually think that Americans particularly don't fight back. Now, and I know this is going to sound arrogant. I know I wouldn't be this person, mainly because I can point to very really hard situations to talk about where I faced significant consequences for kind of calling things out for being bullshit. And, a lot of the people who would privately talk to me about things and be like, this is horrible. When I publicly said something, they would say, oh my God, why would you do that? And they kind of rejected and shunned me. So I just want to point out that I think most people are rule followers, and most people don't think they're Minsu. Most people are Minsu. 90% of people are Minsu. Most people don't have the backbone, and when it comes down to it, they're going to do whatever they can, and they're always going to prioritize their survival over all else, over loyalty. And for the most part, I think society makes it make sense. And even the criticisms of Gihan, right, where people are like, why would he go back to the games? This is all crazy talk. Well, that's because, I mean, technically he has other priorities like his child, but there's this idea that he is this principled individual, and that's very frustrating and puzzling for people to understand. But despite knowing that 456 people or 455 people die every year as a result of these games, most people who are commenting on the show are basically saying, well, why wouldn't you just ignore that? Why wouldn't you just continue on with your life? And I think that's kind of calls to this idea of why abuses continue, why like egregious and excessive abuses tend to continue on. It's because most of us are kind of taught that the consequences that come from standing up for what is right is simply not worth it. And I think Minsu definitely needs to be further expanded, because I think he represents the average person, but the average person doesn't see themselves in Minsu because they are not self-aware in the same way Minsu is not self-aware about who he is. Okay, so also kind of fun, 2 Korean rappers actually appear in season 2, because on top of T.O.P. from Big Bang, who plays Thanos, we also get legendary Korean rapper / actor Young Dong-gyun. I actually recognized him from, like, there's this show, I believe on KBS, about like fathers taking care of their kids. It's a kind of ridiculous premise, but he was on that show as well. He's just a really legendary individual within Korean media, and he was also a rapper. I think he started as a rapper and then transitioned into being an actor. I think this mother and son duo provides a fascinating dynamic. But I think it could have been explored more by fleshing out the son character and making him a bit more compelling. I thought the mom was actually fantastic. I think she was the highlight of the show for me, because she had this familiar maternal annoyingness, but it really always brought the drama back to earth, right? This reminder that somebody's going to miss these people, which is a huge question I think a lot of people ask, is like, why does nobody ask where these people are, what they're doing? But regardless, somebody's going to miss these people. Somebody is hurt by the financial decisions that other people make. In this situation, we have, a mother who is burdened by her son's gambling addiction. But we also, here in America, we see that with student loans where, maybe you thought your parents had saved money. And even though none of us are really entitled to, free higher education, if your parents decide to use the money for something else, that is going to significantly affect your financial life and moving forward. So it's just this idea that our financial decisions have rippling effects to people around us, and usually our immediate family is the ones who suffer the most because we're unable to keep up with financial decisions that we make. Although I'm not blaming, I understand again that Squid Games is a societal critique as opposed to an individual one, but in this case, because it definitely seems far more that it's a gambling addiction, I think that this is kind of a personal. And addiction, again, I understand it's also a disease. It's this thing that you have to have a concerted effort with usually medical help in order to get yourself out of that trap. I thought the ending was also kind of annoying, since it was clear to me that a lot of people would die from Gi-hun's plan. But I was compelled by the development, particularly of the young ex-Marine Daeho. I like that they showed he was this vulnerable guy. And that, like, I think, again, a lot of people would be Daeho. A lot of people think that if they were given a gun, even if they had been in the army before or any combative situation, they think that they would be like the trans woman Hyunju, and they just know what to do and they'd be kicking ass. Most of us would not. Even, of course, most of us without military experience. Just to give context, every Korean man has military experience, so that's why these characters are assumed to be able to handle guns pretty well, but they could have been rusty because usually most of them do their military service in their late teens and early 20s, but still, these men are assumed to know how to handle guns, and it's still shell-shocking. And also, most Korean Korean soldiers don't actually do combat. It's just training them so that they're prepared for combat when it does happen. Anyway, I like the idea of Inhu as well, just like rushing to get into his frontman costume. I don't know why. I had that image in my head of him just like running to the back and getting his frontman costume and putting it on real quick. But I thought that was really funny. Anyway, my last comment or about the show specifically is going to be like, I wonder how the clients see this particular iteration of the game if they're entertained by it. I personally would. I think that there's a lot of interpersonal intrigue for this. And even though it's kind of slow in how people are dying, I think that the client should see this as a really cool opportunity to see how people really come at each other and kill each other in a dynamic where they think that they're going to win. I think there's sort of a boringness of fear, which I think was far more evident in season 1, but the fear in season 2 is more about Gi-hun's desire to take over the game and shut it down. So yeah, it's ultimately frustrating to see that Squid Game has become a part of the capitalist fabric that it is criticizing. So as you can tell, I didn't talk a lot about capitalist criticisms because that wasn't as evident here. But Hwang Dong-hyuk, the creator, the writer of the show, has expressed frustration in creating an extension to the original show. He has said in a Variety interview, "I'm so exhausted. I'm so tired. In a way, I have to say, I'm so sick of Squid Game. I'm so sick of my life. Making something, promoting something. So I'm not thinking about my next project right now. I'm just thinking about going to some remote island and having my own free time without any cell phone calls from Netflix." So he's really done with this game. And even though he deserves his success and I'm happy that he's making money, because he also did complain that he didn't make that much money from season 1. They didn't know it was going to be success. It was just supposed to be another one of Netflix, trash shows that they put online to make it seem like they have this infinite selection, but it ended up being a huge hit. And so now he gets to collect his coin and make his money. And that is very clear based off the advertisements and all the branding that we see for Squid Game. So I think that ultimately Squid Game is now a product, and I think it's unfortunate that its capitalistic critique will ultimately be misremembered and misunderstood, and any future revisiting of the Squid Game craze. Like, I can imagine in 2030 someone's like, let's revisit Squid Game, and people will be talking about Mr. Beast, all the products, all the advertisements, pink men in suits traveling around the world and doing different gimmicks. But I do want to just come back to this idea that Squid Game is about how all of us can be trapped in a very vicious cycle to the point where we are willing to literally kill ourselves in order to find a way to restart again. And if we can't make that money, what is life worth living? And I think that's a question that we should really consistently think about. What would ever get somebody to get to this point? And yes, as I mentioned, a gambling addiction is a part of this. But I do think that there's just this aspect of, is my life worth living if I am so burdened by debt? Anyway, sad way to end, but that is my review of Squid Games 2. Again, I highly recommend watching it. I do think it's worth it. And I think that maybe we're going to see more profound analysis unfurl in season 3. Until next time, this was Strategic Delusion.